On a rainy night in 1962, Robert Calloway drove down a lonely stretch of Highway 41 in South Carolina. He had been on the road for hours, exhaustion creeping in, but he was determined to make it home by morning. The wipers scraped against the windshield, barely keeping up with the downpour. His headlights cut through the darkness, revealing little more than the slick road ahead. Towns were few and far between, and the radio was nothing but static. Just as he considered pulling over to rest, his headlights caught something on the side of the road. A figure standing in the rain, their arm raised in a slow hitchhiker's gesture. Robert was not the kind of man to pick up strangers, but something about the figure gave him pause. As he got closer, he saw that it was a woman. She wore a pale blue dress, soaked through from the rain, her long dark hair plastered to her face. She wasn't carrying an umbrella or even a bag. He hesitated but then sighed, pulling over. She opened the door without a word and slid into the passenger seat. Water dripped from her dress onto the leather upholstery. Robert glanced at her, but she didn't meet his gaze. Her face was young, early 20s maybe, but her skin was unnaturally pale, and her eyes were strangely distant, as if she were looking at something far beyond the windshield. "Where you headed?" Robert asked, trying to sound casual. "Home," she said softly. He nodded and pulled back onto the road. "Where's home?" She hesitated before answering. "Just down the highway, not far." Robert focused on the road ahead, but he couldn't shake the unease creeping up his spine. Something about her voice, it was barely louder than the rain, yet it filled the entire car. He glanced at her again. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. Her dress, despite being drenched, didn't seem to leave any moisture on the seat. "You from around here?" he asked, trying to make conversation. She didn't answer right away. "I used to be." He frowned. Something about her tone felt off, detached, like she was speaking from somewhere far away. The rain picked up, hammering against the car. The road ahead was empty except for the occasional flicker of a streetlight. The feeling of unease deepened. Robert stole another glance at his passenger. She was staring straight ahead, unblinking. The dim glow of the dashboard cast shadows on her face, making her features look almost hollow. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. For the first time, she turned to look at him. Her dark eyes locked onto his. "I need to get home," she whispered. Something in her voice sent a chill down his spine. He swallowed hard and nodded. "All right." They drove in silence for another mile before she finally spoke again. "Turn here," she said, pointing to a narrow dirt road that led into the woods. Robert hesitated. The road was barely visible in the rain, and there were no signs, no houses in sight. "You live down this way?" he asked. She nodded. "Just a little further." Something in his gut told him not to turn, but against his better judgment he did. The road twisted through the trees, the rain turning the dirt to mud. The headlights illuminated little beyond the narrow path ahead. His hands tightened on the wheel. Then, suddenly, she spoke again. "This is where I died." Robert's blood ran cold. He turned to her, but the seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. There was no sound, no movement. She was just gone. For several seconds, he sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. Then, slowly, he turned back to the road ahead. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and in the glow of his headlights, just a few yards ahead, he saw it, a rusted-out wreck of a car, crushed against a tree. The windshield was shattered, vines creeping through the broken glass. The driver's side door hung open. Inside, slumped over the wheel, was a skeleton in a pale blue dress. Robert didn't scream. He couldn't. With shaking hands, he put the car in reverse and backed out of the narrow road as fast as he could. The second he hit the highway, he floored it, speeding through the night without looking back. When he reached the next town, he stopped at a diner, still shaking. The waitress, noticing his pale face, asked if he was all right. He hesitated, then told her what had happened. She listened, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she sighed. That road used to lead to the old Thompson farm, she said. Their daughter, Eleanor, died in a crash there nearly 20 years ago. People say she still tries to get home. Robert never drove that stretch of Highway 41 again. But sometimes, late at night, he thought about that pale blue dress, those distant eyes, and the soft whisper of her voice. And he wondered how many other travelers had picked up the passenger who never made it home.